The object that broke my sister-in-law was a hollow carved mane carousel horse. My mother painted every spring, a foot-tall wooden replica of the big horses on the ride, with a hidden compartment behind 2 brass screws underneath its belly. Inside that horse, my mother left me the only copy of her real will and a warning in her shaky handwriting that read, "Do not trust them. Save yourself." By the time I found it, my sister-in-law had forged a codicil cutting me out of the estate, sold my mother's 1950s seaside carousel and snack pavilion to a regional amusement chain for $910,000, and mailed me a $4,800 cotton candy check as a payoff. This is the story of how I voided that sale, buried her forgery under a mountain of probate fraud evidence, and ended up running the spindle of deceit carousel, where I wax brass poles in a smock that says, painted over my inheritance, and every ride ticket prints her probate fraud docket. I am going to tell you exactly how it happened, including the part where my sister-in-law stepped over my body to grab a blank folder. I was 60 years old and had spent 27 of those years as a school custodian in a small Massachusetts coastal town, the kind of place where the salt air rusts the swing sets and the boiler rooms smell like damp concrete and heating oil. I was responsible for everything from boiler maintenance and snow removal to stripping gym floors and unjamming old locks. I gave up my rented apartment and my quiet routines to move back into my mother's house when her liver began to fail, because she had no one else, and because I was the one who always showed up. My mother was the quiet architect of our family, the one who kept the seaside carousel and snack pavilion running while my father drifted into grief, and my brother Dale played golden child from a safe distance. The pavilion still smelled like popcorn salt and marine varnish, and the carousel horses had real horsehair tails and hand-carved manes, every layer of paint applied by her own careful hand each spring. I did not know it yet, but she had already built a legal trap that would save me. The one detail that pays off later is that I knew how to open old locks without a key. 2 decades of unsticking classroom file cabinets, teacher desk drawers, and supply closet deadbolts had taught me to use a tension wrench and a rake pick. I could feel for the pins at the shear line, apply just enough torque to bind them, and turn the plug before the springs reset. I kept a small leather case in my work boot, not because I was a thief, but because the school district never had money for new locks, and I was tired of waiting for the maintenance truck. The lockpick case had a worn pocket for the tension wrench and a felt flap for the rake pick, and I could open a standard 5-pin schlage in under 20 seconds even in the dark. I had also learned how to read a balance sheet from decades of stretching a custodian's salary, how to spot a forged signature by the pressure and rhythm of the strokes, and how to fix almost anything mechanical that broke in an old building. Those skills were about to become the difference between being erased and being free. Mom died on a Tuesday at 4:12 in the afternoon. I was holding her hand. The hospice nurse had turned off the oxygen, and the room had that heavy, still quality of waiting. Mom's fingers were cold and papery, but her grip was still strong until the last hour. She had been lucid enough in the morning to ask me to bring the small wooden horse from the sewing room so she could see it on the windowsill. I did. She looked at it for a long time, then said, "Keep it close." I thought she meant for sentimental reasons. She meant the screws underneath the belly. I did not know that yet. She died with her eyes open, looking at that little horse, and I closed them with my thumb. The hospice nurse came in and did the official pronouncement, and I sat in the chair by the bed while the late afternoon light went gray over the sea. By Wednesday morning at 9, my brother Dale and his wife Renee were standing in her kitchen with legal pads, a checklist, and a professional photographer they had hired to document the estate for what Renee called insurance purposes. They did not ask how I was sleeping. Renee had already pulled the property tax records, contacted a real estate appraiser, and booked a meeting with a probate attorney. She said she was managing things so I could rest, but her clipboard had a section labeled immediate liquidation. She wore a camel coat over a white silk blouse, and her heels clicked on the linoleum like a countdown. Dale stood behind her with that blank, agreeable face he had worn since we were children. He smelled like expensive cologne and booze, even at 9 in the morning. They started walking through the house with black contractor bags before the funeral home had even picked out the flowers. Renee pointed at things and said keep, sell, trash. She was a sharp little woman with expensive highlights, and a tan that did not come from the Massachusetts coast in April. Dale followed her with his phone, filming the rooms for his social media stories, while she narrated the value of Mom's china, the resale market for mid-century lamps, and the estimated auction price of a 1950s jukebox that still played scratchy 45s. At one point, she held up a pressed glass candy dish and said, "This is worth $40 on a good day," which was the same dish our grandmother had used for peppermints at every holiday. I wanted to throw it at her, but I kept my face slack and my hands in my cardigan pockets. I had spent a lifetime watching people like Renee treat other people's grief as an inventory problem. When Renee got to the shelf in Mom's sewing room, she picked up the small wooden carousel horse, maybe a foot tall, with a cracked mane and layers of oil paint in pale blue and gold. She turned it over, sniffed, and dropped it into the trash bag. "That is worthless flea market junk," she said. "Nobody buys painted horses with bad manes. It smells like turpentine and old lady." Dale did not even look up from his phone. The trash bag already had coffee grounds, a used tissue, and a torn piece of wax paper from a deli sandwich. I watched the horse disappear under a crumpled receipt and a banana peel. I said nothing. There are moments when silence is the only power you have left, and I had been practicing it for years. I waited until they left to pick up lunch. Then I pulled that horse out of the trash, wiped off the coffee grounds and a smear of mayonnaise, and carried it to the kitchen table like it was made of thin glass. The wood was warm from the sun coming through the window, and the paint had small crack lines like an oil portrait. The horse had a real horsehair tail and a tiny bridle made of leather strings, and its right front hoof was chipped from years of being moved from shelf to shelf. I unscrewed the 2 small brass screws under its belly with a dime, because a coin fit the slot better than a screwdriver. The body was hollow, and inside was a rolled document tied with a piece of butcher's string and a small brass key. The document was my mother's original will, signed and dated 11 months before she died, leaving me 70% of the Carousel and Snack Pavilion and 30% to Dale. On the last page, below the notary block, my mother had written in pencil, "Do not trust them. Save yourself." The key was labeled Spindle Point Trust, protector copy. I sat there for a long time, breathing through the smell of stale coffee and old turpentine, putting together the pieces. My mother had not been confused. She had known exactly who would come for her assets. The warning was not paranoia. It was a field note from a woman who had watched Renee for years. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe a handwritten will and a hollow horse can still bury a forged codicil. Renee did not waste time. 3 days after the funeral, she sat me down at her dining table with a stack of papers. "We need to take care of you," she said, pushing a durable power of attorney toward me. "Dale and I will handle the estate, the taxes, the property, everything. You just sign here so we can protect you." She had a pen ready, a navy blue ballpoint with her own name printed on the side, the kind real estate agents give away at open houses. The table was set with a single glass of water and a plate of lemon cookies that had been left out too long. The soft light from the chandelier made the whole thing look like a scene from a bank commercial. Except the document in front of me gave Renee full authority over my bank accounts, my Social Security, my Medicare, and my share of Mom's estate. It also had a clause appointing Renee as my health care proxy. The fine print on page 4 authorized her to sell any real property in my name. I made my hands tremble. I said my head felt foggy, that I was still on grief medication and could not read fine print. I told her I would sign next week when my head cleared. Renee smiled and patted my arm. "Of course, take your time," but she never let the papers leave the room. She left them on the corner of the dining table like a baited trap. The next morning, Renee called me into the kitchen and asked me to sign a simple form so she could speak to Mom's doctors about my health. She called it a HIPAA release. I let my fingers fumble with the pen and said the medication made my hands shake. She sighed and said we would try again later. That afternoon, she took me to the DMV to transfer my car into Dale's name, just so he can drive you to appointments, she said. I told her I needed to think about it. She smiled again, but her eyes went flat, like a door closing from the inside. That night, I heard her on the phone with someone, saying, "She is worse than I thought. We can move faster if we get a cognitive evaluation." I wrote that down in a small spiral notebook I kept in my underwear drawer, along with the date and the exact time. Old custodian habit. If you do not document it, it did not happen. Within 10 days, they moved me into their spare bedroom under the guise of care. In reality, they wanted my mail, my phone calls, and my signature within arm's reach. They took my car keys and the title to my old Honda. They set up a landline in my room that routed through their phone, and Renee told me she had canceled my cell phone to save money. She cooked me small plates of undercooked chicken and watched me push food around, then reported to Dale that I was too depressed to eat. She watched my medication, counted my pills, and once stood in the bathroom doorway while I brushed my teeth, studying me like a project. I played weak. I let my hair go flat, let my voice go soft, let my eyes drift. I nodded at everything, but I never signed anything. I also began taking mental photographs of every room, every drawer, every file folder I passed, because I knew that eventually one of those drawers would open. The first red flag came on a Thursday afternoon. From the spare bedroom window, I could see Renee pacing on the back deck with her cell phone pressed to her ear. She would dial, hang up, dial again, then throw the phone onto a chair. I heard fragments. The bank keeps asking for a trust consent. Tell them we have it. I don't care what Lyle said, close the deal. At night, Dale sat at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and a fifth of bourbon, whispering about a bridge loan, a balloon payment, and a closing date that kept moving. I started keeping a small notebook in my sock drawer, writing down license plates, dates, and exact words. Old custodian habit. If you do not document it, it did not happen. I wrote down every visitor, every phone call, every piece of mail that had a bank logo or a legal return address. The paper trail was building itself. I watched their spending. Renee bought a $90,000 Range Rover with cash, but 3 weeks later a tow truck came and took it back because she had missed the first payment. She ordered new furniture, then returned it. She charged gas station sushi and designer dog sweaters to a credit card that was declined at the pharmacy. The house smelled like unpaid bills and panic. Collection letters started arriving in the mail, thick envelopes with red final notice stamps, and Renee would tear them open over the kitchen sink and then burn the pages in the backyard fire pit. She thought I could not smell the smoke from upstairs. She thought wrong. I recognized the smell of burning paper from my years cleaning out school furnaces, and I could read the addresses on the envelopes before she burned them. The words North Pier Capital and Bay Breeze Amusements appeared more than once. One morning, the deadbolt on the hallway office door jammed shut while Renee was inside. She screamed and kicked the door. Dale tried a screwdriver and stripped the screws. I came down the hall with my little leather case, knelt by the knob, and asked if she wanted me to try. Renee laughed, but Dale said do it. I slid a tension wrench into the keyway, applied light torque, and worked a rake pick across the pins. The lock turned in 11 seconds. Renee stepped out with her face red. "How did you do that?" she asked. I shrugged and said old school locks are like old people, they just need a little patience. After that, she let me fix the garbage disposal, the leaky sink trap, and the thermostat. She treated me like slow hired help, which was exactly what I wanted. She also stopped locking the office door at night because she assumed I was too foggy to notice. That Friday, I waited until 1 a.m. The house was still. I slipped out of my room, went to the office, and closed the door behind me. The room smelled like toner and stale coffee. There was a black filing cabinet in the corner with a keypad lock. Renee changed the code weekly, but she kept a sticky note with the code under the desk lamp. I used it, then opened the top drawer. My heart hammered in my ears as the drawer slid open with a soft metal sigh. I did not turn on the overhead light. I used a small flashlight from my boot, the one I carried for checking behind school radiators. Inside was a folder labeled Spindle Point Closing. I spread the documents on the floor and read them with the flashlight. The first document was a first codicil to the last will and testament of Margaret Hale, dated 3 weeks before Mom died. It cut me out completely and named Dale as the sole heir to the Carousel and Snack Pavilion. The signature at the bottom looked like my mother's, but the loops on the capital M were too round, and the pressure was wrong. I had watched my mother sign birthday cards for 30 years. Her pen never paused at the top of the M, and her final stroke always flicked upward. This signature had hesitation marks, and the paper was indented where someone had traced over a light box or a window. This was traced. The second document was a purchase and sale agreement between Dale Hale, as purported executor, and Bay Breeze Amusements, a regional chain that owned 4 coastal arcades. The price was $910,000. The closing date had been extended 3 times. The third document was a bridge loan agreement from a hard money lender called North Pier Capital. Dale and Renee had borrowed $240,000 against the Carousel property to cover their own debts before the sale closed. Attached to the loan was a personal guarantee. My name was on the guarantee as a co-signer. The signature was not mine. It was my name written in Renee's sharp upward slant, with the same blue ink she used on the sticky notes. If the sale failed, I was personally liable for the $240,000 plus 18% interest. The interest was compounding monthly, and the default acceleration clause meant the entire balance could come due in 30 days. I read that clause 3 times. It was written to destroy me. The fourth document was a wire transfer instruction from the closing attorney to an account at a bank in St. Kitts. The account name was Hale Coastal Holdings. It was not a trust account. It was a shell. The fifth document was a draft petition for a conservatorship, prepared by Renee's lawyer. It alleged I was suffering from dementia and unable to manage my own affairs. It requested that Renee be appointed my conservator. The date on the draft was 2 days before my fake Foggy Act started. They were going to have me declared incompetent, strip my rights, and blame me for the forged guarantee if the deal collapsed. The sixth document was a letter from Renee to Dale's sister, me, dated 3 weeks earlier, explaining that I would receive a $4,800 cotton candy check as a courtesy. It was signed with a flourish. I realized later that check was not a payoff. It was bait to make me sign a release. I took photos of every page with a burner phone I had hidden in a tampon box in my closet. Then I put everything back exactly as I found it, reset the keypad, and went to bed. I did not sleep. I lay there listening to the refrigerator hum and the soft tick of the baseboard heaters, planning my next move like I used to plan snow removal routes before a nor'easter. You do not panic and you do not telegraph. You wait for the right hour and the right leverage. The office door had a second lock, a simple cabinet lock on the closet, and I made a mental note to check it next time. I also noticed a shredder in the corner with a full bin, and I knew I would need to go through the strips later. The next morning, I called the trust department at Spindle Point Trust from a pay phone at a gas station, using the key from the horse and the document I had found. I had to wait for the bus because I had no car, and I told Renee I was walking to the pharmacy for my refill. The trust officer was a woman named Alina Ruiz. She had been trying to reach me for weeks. "Your mother left you a protector role in the trust," she said. "That means no sale of the Carousel or pavilion can close without your notarized consent in person. We have a copy of the original trust. Your sister-in-law has been submitting forged consent forms. We froze the closing." I told her about the Codicil, the forged guarantee, and the conservatorship draft. Alina went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can you come in with the original will and the key? We need to file a lis pendens and notify the title company. If you can give us the evidence, the bank will refer this to the FBI." I said I would be there that afternoon. I hung up and stood by the pay phone for a long minute, watching the gulls circle the gas station dumpster. I was shaking, but not from fear. I was shaking because for the first time in weeks I had a plan. I did not call a family lawyer. I did not give Renee a warning. I went to the bank that afternoon, met Alina in a small conference room, and let her scan every document. She confirmed the trust was irrevocable and outside probate. The codicil to the will was worthless. The property could not be sold without my signature as protector. The bridge loan guarantee was a federal wire fraud charge waiting to happen. She also told me the trust had a specific requirement that the protector be present in person, with 2 forms of identification and a notary public from the trust's approved list, so no forged signature could ever be enough. My mother had written that provision herself. Alina also told me something that made my chest go cold. "Your mother set up a dead man's switch," she said. "The trust has a clawback provision. If anyone attempts to sell or encumber the assets without the protector's consent, the transaction is void from the beginning, and all proceeds revert to the trust. Your mother wrote it specifically because she suspected Renee would try this. She even left a notarized letter with us to be opened only if a sale was attempted. She handed me a copy of the letter. In it, my mother wrote, My daughter will come. She may look broken. She is not. The horse knows. I read that line several times. She had signed it with the same flick upward at the end of her stroke. I could see her sitting at her kitchen table, writing that letter with the sea wind coming through the screen door. She knew I would find the horse. She knew I would keep it. She had counted on my competence and my silence. I did not confront them. Instead, I staged a medical scare to see if any shred of humanity remained. 2 days after my bank meeting, I waited until Renee was in the kitchen signing a stack of closing documents. I clutched my chest, let my knees buckle, and collapsed on the hallway floor with a folder in my hand. I made my breathing ragged and my eyes roll back. I had practiced the fall the night before in the bathroom, making sure I landed on my hip without bruising too badly. I lay there on the cold tile, one arm twisted under my body, the folder held loosely in my fingers. The hallway light was bright, and I could smell the lemon cleaner Renee used on the counters. Renee heard the thud. She walked over, looked down at me, and then looked at the folder. She did not call 911. She did not check my pulse. She stepped over my legs, pulled the folder from my fingers, and said, "Finally." Then she walked back to the kitchen and opened it. It was empty. I had filled it with blank paper. I could hear the pages slap against the table, and then the sharp intake of her breath as she realized there was nothing there. I lay there for another 10 seconds, listening to her curse. Then I sat up, brushed off my knees, and said, "You just stepped over a dying woman for a blank folder." Renee's face went white. I was not foggy anymore. She dropped the folder and backed against the kitchen counter. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. I stood up slowly, keeping my voice low and even. "You forged my mother's will," I said. "You forged my name on a bridge loan. You drafted a conservatorship petition to have me declared incompetent. And you just proved that you would let me die on the floor if it got you one blank page closer to the money." Renee tried to laugh. "You have no proof," she said. "That folder was nothing." "I know exactly what is in that office," I said. "I know about the Codicil. I know about the St. Kitts account. I know about North Pier Capital." Her face went from white to gray. She took a step toward me, then stopped. I walked past her, opened the front door, and left. I spent that night at a motel on the highway, using the cash I had hidden in my boot, and I called Alina from the motel phone. The trap was already closing. 3 days later, Renee and Dale woke me at 8 in the morning. "We're going to the bank," Renee said. "You need to sign a consent form so we can close Mom's estate. It's just a formality. You don't need to read it." She was sweating through her blouse. Dale had not shaved. The kitchen smelled like burned coffee and Renee's expensive perfume, and the whole house felt like a wire pulled too tight. I had come back from the motel the night before, ready to finish it. Renee had been drinking, and there was a bottle of gin on the counter with the cap missing. I said I would go. Dale drove. Renee sat in the back with her hand clamped around my wrist the whole way. She kept saying, "Just sign the paper, Mary. Then we can all move on." The car was a rental because the Range Rover was gone, a silver sedan that smelled like stale air freshener and desperation. I watched the seaside town roll past, the Carousel and the snack pavilion closed and dark behind the chain-link fence, the seagulls landing on the ticket booth. I kept my face blank and my free hand on the door handle. My leg was tense, and I could feel the small brass key from the horse in my coat pocket, pressing against my ribs like a reminder. At the bank, we were escorted to a private room by a young teller. Elena Ruiz was already there, along with 2 men in suits I did not know. Renee shoved a document across the table. "Sign it. It gives us the money." Her voice had a desperate crack, and her hand left a damp mark on the paper. I looked at the document. It was a trust protector consent to sale, prepared by Renee's lawyer. It would authorize the sale of the Carousel and the snack pavilion to Bay Breeze Amusements for $910,000. It would also validate the bridge loan guarantee with my forged signature. There was a signature line for me at the bottom and a notary block, and Renee had already filled in the date with blue ink. The notary block was blank, but Renee had a notary public waiting in the lobby, a woman she had paid to notarize any signature I made. I could see the document was drafted to make my consent irrevocable, with a clause that said I acknowledged the prior guarantee as valid and released any claims against the loan. I put the pen down. "No," I said. Renee's voice cracked. "Sign it, Mary. You don't understand. We owe $240,000. We will lose everything." Dale sat next to her, his face pale and his hands twisted in his lap. I stood up and looked at Dale. "She forged Mom's name on a codicil. She forged my name on a guarantee. She drafted a petition to have me declared incompetent. And you helped her. Dale looked at the floor. Renee grabbed the document. You stupid, ungrateful woman, she hissed. This was your mother's fault for putting everything in a trust. Your mother was smarter than both of you, I said. She knew exactly what you would try. I took a step back and said the only words I had been holding for 3 months. You can forge her signature. You can forge mine. But you cannot forge my consent while I am standing here. As soon as the word consent left my mouth, Elena Ruiz slid a red folder across the table. The 2 men in suits stood up. One of them said, Renee Hale, you are under arrest for forgery, wire fraud, and attempted conservatorship fraud. The other one read Dale his rights. The bank had already alerted the FBI. The trust's clawback provision had voided the sale. The wire transfer to St. Kitts was frozen. The bridge loan company was notified. The amusement chain was on hold. I had called Alina from the motel and given her the go-ahead to notify the authorities and schedule the final meeting. The 2 men in suits were federal agents. They had been waiting in the adjacent room with a recorder running. Renee tried to run. She made it as far as the lobby before a security guard blocked the door. Dale just sat there with his head in his hands, crying about the Range Rover. I watched them take her away in handcuffs, her silk blouse rumpled and her expensive highlights sticking to her forehead. Dale followed in a daze, still holding the envelope of forged documents like it could save him. I stayed in the conference room with Alina, breathing slowly, and signed nothing. The only consent that mattered had been withheld, and that single act of refusal was enough to collapse their entire scheme. Renee was charged with 9 counts of forgery, 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of attempted grand theft, and 1 count of elder abuse. She took a plea deal 2 months later and was sentenced to 6 years in state prison. Dale got 3 years for conspiracy and perjury. Their house, the one they moved me into, was seized to satisfy the bridge loan and the civil judgment from Bay Breeze Amusements. The St. Kitts account was repatriated. The amusement chain backed out of the deal and sued Renee for the deposit. The civil suit judgment against her totaled $280,000, which she will be paying off for the rest of her natural life, plus restitution. The court also ordered Renee to pay back every dollar she had taken from my personal accounts, including the $20 she had stolen from my purse on the day of the fake collapse. That detail made the prosecutor smile. The probate court voided the codicil and admitted Mom's original will. The Carousel and snack pavilion came back to me. Because of the clawback provision, the $910,000 sale was nullified from the beginning, but the trust was made whole by the asset forfeiture from Renee and Dale. I received the full 70% interest, plus the right to manage the property as protector. The $4,800 cotton candy check Renee had mailed me as a mock payoff was never cashed. I framed it and hung it in the ticket booth, right next to the original will and the forged codicil. The check is slightly yellowed now, but the bank routing number and the word pay to the order of are still visible, along with Renee's signature in the corner. People stop and read it. They always ask the same question. I tell them it was the cheapest thing she ever tried to buy. 6 months after the arrest, I reopened the Carousel under a new name, Spindle of Deceit Carousel. I hired 2 local mechanics and a retired ride operator. The snack pavilion sells popcorn and saltwater taffy. I wax the brass poles every morning in a smock that says painted over my inheritance. Every ride ticket prints a small receipt with the probate fraud docket number, the forged codicil case number, and the clawback provision citation. Kids don't read it. Their parents do. Some of them ask me about it, and I tell them the story in 2 sentences. Most of them just nod and buy another bag of cotton candy. My mother's hollow horse sits in a glass case by the ticket booth, with the original will and the brass key beside it. I still paint the cracked mane every spring, same pale blue and gold, because she taught me that the most valuable things are often the ones other people throw away. The Carousel itself needed a fair amount of work after months of neglect. I replaced 3 cracked brass pole sleeves, repacked the main bearing with high-temperature grease, and rebuilt the antique band organ with new bellows cloth. The horses got fresh paint on their saddles and new bridle leather. The first time the ride turned under its own power after the reopening, I stood in the center and listened to the calliope wheeze out an old song, and I could feel my mother in every revolution. I still have the lockpick case in my boot, though I rarely need it now. The only locks left are the ones on the ticket booth, and I have the keys. There is a moral in this, and it is not about revenge. It is about integrity. My mother kept her integrity in a hollow horse and a trust provision. She did not scream about family loyalty. She wrote a warning and a way out. She trusted me to use both. Boundaries are not walls. They are locked doors, and sometimes you have to pick the lock to see who is on the other side. I spent 60 years learning how to open things. It took a dead woman's note and a hollow horse to teach me how to close them. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If this story reminded you to keep your own warnings in a safe place, hit like and subscribe for more. I will see you in the next one.